Hey, hope you guys are doing okay. This is Tepechu. Welcome to the second episode of my new Roblox scripting guide for beginners series. If you haven't watched the first episode, I've linked it down in the description below. But what we're gonna do is I'm gonna say a brief overview of what happened in the first episode. So in the first episode, it was just simply an introduction to the um, what do you call it, to Roblox Studio and how to use a user interface, as well as explaining the parent-child hierarchy and what local scripts and module scripts are. And it explains like a few other basic fundamentals about Roblox Studio pretty much. But in this episode, I'm going to be actually explaining the scripting fundamentals. And by the end of this video, you should be able to know what a variable is, what data types you can store in a variable, and what if conditions are as well. So I did realize in the last episode I've made it a bit long, it was half an hour, so I do aim to make it around 15 minutes, maybe less than that, um, in the future. So yeah, so that's the objective. Um, Without further ado, let's get started then. So currently I've got my Roblox Studio place open, so if you haven't done that, I suggest you open it now. And what I'm gonna do now is I've got workspace open, just gonna click on plus, create a script. So I'm going to remove this, and I need to explain what data types are. So when we're scripting, we're going to need to use something called a data type. So when we're storing down data, so for example, if you're storing it in a variable, because or just using it in like in other places in our code, or referring to a property in an instance or object, we're going to need to know what the data type is pretty much. It's a very important thing that you should know when you're scripting. But yeah, so for now I'm going to teach you a few of the most common ones, and then I think there's probably around 14, I think, from the top of my head, I'm guessing. But I'm going to teach you the few like important ones that you should know. Um yeah, so let's do that now then. So one important thing that you should know is something called an integer. So an integer just pretty much is just a whole number. So it can be literally anything. It could be 0, it could be 1, it could be multiple sizes. As long as it's a whole number, it's referred to as an integer. Secondly, we got something called a float. So a float is it's still a number, however, it has a decimal point in it. So let's say, for example, we did 1.2. That would be referred to as a float. If we did 50.8, for example, that would be a float. And obviously, this decimal point isn't just like limited to just only one digit afterwards. It could be as long as this if we wanted it to be, or it could be as big as that. As long as there's a decimal point, I would refer to that as a float. And I'd say that's pretty much everything you need to know about the numbers sides of data types. Moving on, we need to, let's say, let me give you an example for the integers and floats. So for example, an integer can be referred to as a player's unique user ID, for example. So a user ID is just pretty much like a unique ID that's referred to a player pretty much. That would be always referred as an integer, that'll never be a float. What we could do is also, let's say you wanted to get the amount of objects on the workspace, the amount of children, that would also be a float, because you can't have half an object. So, not a float, I mean an integer. You can't have half an object, so it will always be a whole number, aka an integer. An example for float would be a player's health bar, for example. Obviously, let's say you have a move, let's say you're making a fighting game and you want to subtract health from the player. It doesn't have to just be whole numbers, it could be like float if you want to be more precise, for example. Or let's say, what else? Let's say you're changing the size of a part. Like let's say I go into base plate and then I go down to size and I want to change the X. I can make this be a float just, oh. Could make it be a float just like that. I don't know why it didn't let me before, but that's small. So let me just revert that. But that'd be an example of a float. So moving on would be something called strings. So a string is pretty much just a data type that is referred to words or just letters or just pretty much anything really. So like a word, a sentence, or a character. So the best way to define a string would be to first of all create your first quotation mark, add your word, character, or sentence in it. So let's say I want to do welcome to the welcome to the video. And then I'd end it off with another quotation mark. And here right now is a string. Ignore the red line underneath it. It's because I haven't assigned it to anything. But this would be a string. So you can usually tell, as I said, with these quotation marks, and inside these would be a word, a character, or a sentence. So if I wanted to, I could just store my name. So Depechu. Or I could literally just store gibberish. I mean, it could be like that. It's not only limited to just characters, it can be limited to literally anything you can type. So let's say you wanted to add in numbers, like 1, 2, 3. However, a key factor to know, a key info, I mean, to know is, let's say you're writing down these numbers. This is different to, let's say I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2. So as you can see, this one's in green, but the other one's in yellow. You can see it means that the compiler's seeing them as different data types. So since this one is surrounded by quotation marks, this is referred to as a string. So let's say we wanted to do 1, 2, I need to make it smaller. So let's do 1. Let's say I wanted to do quotation marks 1 plus quotation marks 2. This just wouldn't work out. You'd think it'd be 3, but it doesn't work like that because this is a string. It won't do like numerical addition. However, if we're referring it to it as an integer, we can simply do 1 plus 2, and if we did that in a print statement, for example, we would get 3 written in the message, in the output, I mean. So basically, a string can't have numerical like additions and stuff. It's just simply just text only. So that's a string explained. Our third one that you should know is something called a boolean. So this is very important, especially for what I'm going to teach you next in this video. So a boolean pretty much means a data type that is either holding true or it is holding false. So I'll just write it both just like that. So a true or false, if you see any of these two, that means it's a boolean data type. And it's pretty much straightforward, just like that really. So yeah, let's say for example, you had a checkbox in a property. So let's say I went into the spawn location and I wanted to lock it so I wouldn't be able to touch it with my select button. What I could do is go in here, go in locked, and then I select true. So if I tick this, this basically means that this property is now set to true, as you can see. So this would be true. And obviously if I try and touch it now, I won't be able to like select out all. So obviously I'm going to go back. When I untick this, this is now false. So it's referred to as false like this. So that's what true and false basically means for in properties, for example. But you could also make it so you can do something called an if condition. So you can be like, oh, if let's say if the locked property in spawn location is set to false, then do so and so. But that's an example that I'll explain later on in this video. So booleans is just pretty much true or false. And then the last important data type that you should know of is something called a table. So a table is pretty much just a list. So let's say I did well, let me think of something. Apples, oranges, and pears. So this would be referred to as a list or a table. I'll just call it, or in other words, it's also referred to as an array. In Roblox it's a bit weird, like the programming language. People refer to it as different things. But you can either call this a table, an array, a list. It basically means the same thing. So yeah, so it just pretty much just stores in a list of objects. As you can see here, I've just stored in, as you can see, strings. So apples is a string, orange is a string, pears is a string. But unlike in other programming languages, Roblox is really flexible where you don't have to you don't have to make the list only have a one variable type only, one data type. you could set it to different data types. So let's say I want to do apples and then true and then 5 and then do orange instead. This would still work perfectly fine, which is pretty cool. So any data type that you can think of can pretty much just be stored in a table. So I'd say this is your key. These are your 4 important what do you call it, data types that you should know of when you know, beginning your scripting journey on Roblox. So yeah, so those are the 4 main data types. So just to reiterate, it is the floats, integers, strings, and tables / arrays / lists. Obviously there are also some Roblox specific data types that are used in Roblox, of course. Some of these do include something like brick color, for example. So to do that, we would do brick color.new, and then we would define the brick color using a string. It could also mean color as well. So we would do color3.new, and then this represents a color but in a red, green, and blue format. We can also represent something called position. The position and sizing is pretty straightforward. So obviously it's a position and the size of the part. So this is represented with something called vector3.new, and then we would put our x coordinates, y coordinates, and z coordinates like that. Obviously there's a red underline because I didn't put in a number, so I'll do that, for example. So that's how we would represent these x, y, z sort of properties. However, for C-frame it's a bit different. So C-frame you probably haven't heard of before, but it's similar to positioning. However, it also takes into account orientation as well. So when I reposition a part, I won't be able to change the rotation straight away, but with C-frame I can change the position and orientation as well at the same time. So to do that, I would do C-frame.new. And it's similar to a vector3 format, so it'd be x, y, and z. So it'd be like that, and then afterwards you can do additional maths to add in the orientation of the part. However, this is a bit more like complicated. I'm not going to really explain too much about it now, but those are like a few Roblox ones that I can think of from the top of my head. And also a main one would be something called a instance. So let's say I want to refer to an object in workspace such as spawn location. I could do game.workspace.spawn location. So this is a data type on its own technically. That would be an instance. So this is obviously very important, and as well as important as the previous data types that I've mentioned. But yeah, so those are all the main ones that I would suggest that you should know. However, as you script, you'll probably come across a few more data types in Roblox. To learn about it, all you simply do is just search up on Google, check out the Roblox dev wiki as well, and I know for a fact that there'll be lots of help. So that is data types explained. Moving on, I do want to explain something called variables. So you probably heard me mention it here and there, like in this video. But if you don't know what a variable is, it's simply so I can create a variable to store a piece of data in it, or information, for example. To put it in dummy terms, it'd be, imagine having a box and putting an object in, and then you can take that box with you down the code, and then you can open the box and take out the object again. So it's pretty much like you can reuse it pretty much across the script instead of having to refer to the same, like, you know, the same object or data numerous times. So that probably doesn't make much sense as of now, but it'll make a lot more sense after I show you. So to create a variable, we simply write down local. Local, I would say, is very important. You should keep that. So do local, and then to give it a name, you should just give it any word, pretty much, or character. But I can't start with a special character or number. So if I were to start it like that, it wouldn't work, as you can see. There's a red underline. But if I just did it as temperature, it would be a variable. And this is pretty much just a variable. We've made it now. So I'm going to shorten it down to local a. And let's say we want to set it a value, we just do local a equals, and we put in the data type. So if you remember the data types that I mentioned just now, we can literally put any of that mentioned, or any others that you find across your programming journey in Roblox. So let's say I wanted to make a equal to 1. So now the variable a is set to the value of 1. If I did local b, equals 2, for example, I could do a. So now b is set to 2, which is you know, an integer for both a and b. And now let's say I want to do some maths. I could do local c equals a plus b. And what you can imagine here is, so c is the variable name, and it is set to the value of a and b added together or summed up together. So if we did the maths, it'd be 1 plus 2, which is 3. So it would technically be 3, but ignore that last equals. But yeah, so c equals this would be the same as that as well. However, we can do a plus b, and if we were to change a value here, it would reflect in c as well. So this is how you create a variable. So of course this is just I've only showed integers for now, but you can literally do it in strings. If I put in my name, I could do it like that, or I could you know, make it be a flow, or I could give it a color such as really red, or I can give it a position to use later on in the script. There's lots of uses for variables pretty much, but just know that variables allows you to reuse the same data across the script. So yeah, so that's pretty much variable explained. Yeah, so a common practice that people usually do is let me delete the script and let me go into start player scripts and add in a local script. So a common thing that people do would be at the top of their script they would do local and then name a player variable that refers to their local player, so to the client. So local player equals game dot players dot local player. So as you can see, I had to change to a local script to do this. However, if I did this same line of code in a script, it just wouldn't work because a script is run on the server, but a local script is run on the client. Therefore, it can get, you know, who the client is, and then that's a variable, and this would be the data type. And let's say I wanted to get the name, I could do player.name. When I put in a dot, it either means a hierarchy, by the way. So obviously game is storing all these services as explained in the first episode. And then if we go into players, and then of course when we are in game, there'd be a player object. It would basically just go and refer to that like current player that's, you know, running the script. And then after that, once we got an object referenced, we can either do dot, and then we can access a property. So for example, if I had a player up now, I could get the name up, and then I could maybe yeah, I could get the information like that. Yeah, I think a better example would be if I did this in a part instead. So I'm just gonna go back to a script. Let's say I wanted to refer to a part as, wait, I'll do spawn. Spawn equals, sometimes you will have words that pop up as blue, so this means it's a Roblox key term, and therefore you can't use it to name a variable. So for that, you can just simply fix it by just naming it something else. I'm just going to call it spawn part equals game dot workspace dot spawn location, and then after that I can do spawn part dots. So let's say I want to change the name of it. Name equals spawn, and then if I were to press play, for example, it would change it to spawn, but as you can see here, it's originally called spawn location. So this is one way we can use variables and access properties within a object pretty much. So yeah, that's an example of a variable pretty much. And then lastly, I do want to show you what if conditions are. So an if condition is pretty straightforward. So it just basically means if left hand side is equal to right hand side, then do code. So what this is called a if condition. So it basically, it's kind of like maths. So if you know what an equation is, the left hand side must equate to the right hand side. So if I were to do let's say I did 1 plus 1 has to equal to 2, then it would so when the code goes over this, it'll check if the left hand side is equal to the right hand side. If that's the case, then it'll proceed and do the code that's inside the block. So let's say if 1 plus 1 equals 2, then print that is the correct calculation. So if I were to just press play, you can see here it's printed out in the output. That is the correct calculation. However, if I were to make it so that it doesn't be equal to each side. So let's say I wanted to do 1 plus 1 equals 3. Obviously this is not true, so it would not run this code at all. So if I press play, nothing pops up in that output. So this is pretty much like a short summary of the if condition. So yeah, and this also refers to data types that I explained in the beginning. So if you remember, I did true and false, so the boolean. So this can basically make the if condition either be true, where if it's true it'll process with the code that's in the block, or if it's false it'll just completely ignore it. However, there's another part of if conditions, so it's something called an else. So it's let's say I wanted it, so if it's true it does one thing, but if it's not true we can do something else. We can do else print that is not the correct calculation. Now if I were to press play, obviously it would first check is 1 plus 1 equal 3. If it's not, then we'll go into else and we'll just simply do this print into the output. That is not the correct calculation, as you can see. So it's working. If I go back up here and I set it to 2 instead, you can see that it changes to that is the correct calculation. So that is the else statement explained as well. And then yeah, so there's something else called an else if statement. So let's say if 1 plus 1 equals 3, we want this to be false so we can access it. Also with if conditions you can have multiple ifs. So let's say that's what the else if is pretty much. So let's say if 1 plus 1 equals 3, which is not true, then we'll go down a block. We'll do else if 1 plus 1 equals 2, then what is the correct calculation? I'll just add an extra exclamation mark. So what would happen is this code will not run this code pretty much, the if condition, and then it'll access the second else if condition and it'll be like, is 1 plus 1 equals 2? Oh, it's true, so I'm going to run the code that's underneath it, and then it would print out this instead. If I were to do it now, as you can see, it prints out with 2 exclamation marks at the end. That's our indicator that it's working perfectly. And then of course we can add up to basically as much as we want it. So if I wanted to, I could add another else if, but for this example I'm just going to do another else, and I'm just going to do print not correct, and remove the space. I'll make 1 plus 1 equals 4, which is obviously not true. So if I were to press play, it'd go into not correct. So that's pretty much if, else if, and else statements explained. So using this we can basically make decision making in our scripts and give it logic, which is very important to scripting, and it can be used in many scenarios, and I can 100% say you will need this to know. But it's pretty straightforward, but if you have questions about it you can just, you know, answer it straight away in the comments. I'll try my best to reply, or somebody else could reply to it. But yeah, so that is if conditions explained. Yeah, I think that is pretty much everything I want to cover up for this tutorial. If you have any questions, as I said, just ask away in the comment section below. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, leave it a like. If you think I can improve on it, or if you have any feedback, just leave a comment below. And be sure to subscribe and be on the lookout for the next episode in this series. And with that, make sure you practice these 3 skills that you learned. So the data types, using variables and if conditions. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you in the next series, in the next episode I mean. Okay, bye.